This is the Depth Mystic Community Podcast, episode 49. Here we are. With me, as always, is Jungian Depth Mystic Zach Tolan. Hello. We also have Promotional Manager Zach Tolan. Hello. And this week, I guess I have a few things I wrote down for the show. Now, again, I want to warn the audience that for the first 44 episodes of this podcast, we had a topic for each episode. But then we hit a kind of wall, or we fell off a cliff or something, and now we're in kind of a mudslide of sorts, where our commitment to having a community podcast is stronger than our knowledge of exactly what we want to talk about. But that said, I did write some stuff down for the week. Oh yeah, that's kind of like having a topic. You actually planned something, but I guess you just wrote it down, so it's not as if those were our official topics. Let's see what I have here. Number 1, entertainment as ministry. Sacred selling out. Is it possible? Maybe I should ask Promotional Manager Zach Tolan to explain this one, since I suspect it has something to do with our social media presence. Sure, yeah. So I started a SubStack a week or two ago, and I managed to be able to construct 3 posts while still feeling authentic, but I've hit like a wall with the 4th one. You know, I've typed it up several times, but then I deleted it. And the issue is, we're like sellouts. You know, the fact that we're on Substack as a promotional effort. I mean, the very fact that I exist as promotional manager is kind of like us selling out. St. Paul of Tarsus, did he have a promotional manager? Or was his ministry sponsored by God himself? Like when Christianity started, I guess there's just like a bunch of Christians who sort of believe stuff, and it's as if God himself wanted Christianity to come into being. And not so in our case. Hence the existence of me, Promotional Manager Zach Tolan, who has to put on the hat of somebody who thinks that our ministry has something to offer in a world where it's not obvious to anyone but ourselves. Or at least we don't know who to tell or how to get the word out. So I have to sort of do the job of getting the word out somehow. And that feels like selling out because, you know, the original Mystic Vision felt so authentic. And it felt like there has to be some sort of natural way in which this thing expresses itself without us having to deliberately start to do what everybody nowadays seems to be forced to do if they want to become famous or get a message out, which is to go on social media and start doing the stuff. What do you mean the stuff? There's advice that they give you. You have to, you know, post regularly, and it's like a whole job to make sure people know who you are. You have to go and respond to other people's posts and get them to respond to you. And it's a whole process. And it's just kind of funny. I'm not saying we should be exempt from doing the stuff that everybody in the world has to do. The problem is that there's this primal antagonism between my very existence as a promotional manager and the profound sacredness of the original mystic experience, which made us want to have a ministry in the first place. Wow, Promotional Manager Zach Tolan, I don't think I've ever heard a promotional manager be so self-effacing in terms of how low a social status his own role puts him in. But I'll grant that I can see where you're coming from. And when you were saying that, I was thinking, Wow, I'm sure glad we have this podcast then, because we don't advertise the podcast at all, really, or not very well. And nobody knows about it. But at least here we can talk freely about the situation. We can give honest expression to certain things that are proving difficult for you when trying to get the Substack started. So anyway, I've been locked in this primal struggle with entertainment versus ministry, because in order to get people to love you, you have to be sort of entertaining. But the ministry doesn't like the feel of that at all. And I still don't have an answer for it. I was able to make 3 Substack posts, and I'm sort of working on the 4th. I've typed it up a few times, but I've never felt good about it. But that's obviously not good enough. It's not a successful promotional campaign if you can't do the stuff. And the stuff means posting a lot, being there, saying what you think on the social media thing. Okay, well, that's great. That's topic number 1. Let's move on to topic number 2. This one is for Jungian depth mystic Zach Tolan. I hear there was actually something that happened in the world that was depth mystical. Huh. Yes, I could hardly believe it myself, but there's a man named Jonathan Pageau, and he's become relatively well-known in certain circles. How do I even describe him? He's an artist, and he's really interested in mythic symbolism, and arguably he's as close to a depth mystical perspective as we can get, apart from Peter Kingsley, who never says anything anyway, or who rarely says anything, I should say. But he made a speech at a conference, and it's called "You'll Stop Using ChatGPT After This," or something. Anyway, his name is Pageau, Jonathan Pageau. And his speech was actually worthy of our standard, the standard that we keep here in the depth mystical community. And he talked about how AI was a new technology that was in a way taking over society, but that the best thing you could do is to retain your humanity, to tap into your inner source, to figure out what makes you human in the first place. And that is the best defense against the artificial intelligence takeover. And I'm not doing it justice at all. But this is the first speech I've heard in a long time that I think is totally worthy of a depth mystic, that I myself would have been proud to give had I had the opportunity. So I guess we'll link it in the description. Yes, we will. Jungian depth mystic Zach Tolan. There must be more to say about this, right? Who is this guy? Well, he's in the orbit of a couple other guys that people might have heard of. He was hanging out with Jordan Peterson and another guy named John Vervaeke for a while. And these guys are, proximal to depth mysticism. There aren't that many actual depth mystics, but some people get closer than others to talking about the subject matter. And I was super proud, honestly, of Pageau, because he really is reaching the level where he can join the club. Because he's very interested in symbolism. He's much more astutely aware of the power of symbols than most people. And his whole show is named after that, The Symbolic Life. Yeah. I'm just glad that there's somebody else who can actually say the things that a depth mystic ought to say. Because there's just not enough of us. But anyway, yeah, I guess we'll just link to that speech in the notes. It's important, what he said. Okay, let's go on to this final, more mysterious topic that I think you've been working on, Jungian depth mystic Zach Tolan. Has something to do with that dream you had of the woman and the 7-layer city, understanding more about the meaning of it. I'll let you take it from here. Okay, so ever since I had this glorious dream 20 years ago, where a woman came to me in my 7-layer city and said that she had my baby, I've thought of the 7-layer city as the most elegant product of my imagination describing something important, the structure of reality. But I've never actually made any progress on understanding what the different levels were. And the thing that always would happen, I would have this concept of the level 1 process. And I would associate it with the bottom level of the 7-layer city. It's the level of the Great Mother, which is to say anything goes there. There's no judgments. So if I'm recording my voice and I just want to warm up, then I warm up at level 1. I'm not thinking about the quality. And sometimes you need to be in that place where you're allowed to do anything. Okay, I guess the listener will have to indulge your obsession with understanding reality as like these 7 levels rather than any other way. So another way of looking at level 1 is it's paradise. It's the Garden of Eden. There's no knowledge of good and evil. There's no judgment being passed on you when you're in level 1. And this is a great way to warm up. This is a great way to get started when, say, I'm just doing anything, but in particular when I'm recording my voice. But the advance has been that I actually had a concept of level 2 that was different from the other levels. So once you're banished from the Garden of Eden, having eaten from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, in my little scheme, there's 6 more levels of differentiation of, I guess, good and evil, or right and wrong, or standards to which you can apply what you're doing. And the most rudimentary of them is level 2, which is a primal basic idea of what's good and what's bad. So in the case of audio recording, it's acknowledging the existence of good recordings versus bad recordings. There's not that many more criteria than that. It's merely becoming aware that there are things that sound good and things that sound less good. And I guess for some reason that consolidated for me as the next level of conscious assessment. Okay, that does sound pretty deep down the rabbit hole of your way of seeing things. I guess so. It was an achievement for me, though. For years, I've been, on the one hand, obsessed with this 7-layer structure of reality. But on the other hand, I never had a conscious differentiation of any of the levels except level 1. And whenever I would go higher than level 1, I would just say, okay, now I'm in levels 2 through 7. I'm somewhere in levels 2 through 7. Now, ideally, I can get a full understanding of all 7 levels, of what they mean, because then I'll understand my dream from 20 years ago that affects me so much psychologically, because it presented a structured presentation of reality. I mean, everybody wants some kind of structure to their reality, and so my default is to fall back to that dream. Because it was 7 layers, so they were all square. And parts of them would have little balconies cut out so that you could see down to the other layers. And it always felt like I couldn't have come up with that just on my own, that my unconscious actually was more creative than I was. All right. Let's review those 3 questions that we're asking last week. What is the meaning of life? What should a person do with their life as a result? And what specifically should I do with my life? How are we doing on those 3 questions? Well, it's cool that you asked that. It's kind of a reminder of where we were. Obviously, the meaning of life in general is one of the oldest questions of all. And one answer to it is that there's a bunch of archetypes, and each archetype is a source of meaning. And if you balance the archetypes perfectly, then each one will give a certain percentage of the total meaning. And some archetypes will give a greater percentage of the total meaning when balanced perfectly. But most people don't balance them perfectly. Most people just find an archetype that they're good at, and they try to milk it for all that it's worth. thereby implicitly diminishing the significance of the other archetypes, which end up becoming what Jung calls the shadow. And so in our case, we're like a depth mystic, which means we can't actually prioritize any one archetype. As a depth mystic, our sort of responsibility is to recognize the presence of all the archetypes and to pursue more avidly the question of the proper relationship between those archetypes, rather than to seize hold of one of them and to amplify that at the expense of the others, which is what most people do to survive. Wow, that's pretty cool. That's like a novel little theory about the meaning of life. And the naming, I guess, of the archetypes is going to be a problem. Yeah, we're not trying to even name them. We're just trying to acknowledge the overall phenomenon. Because the archetype of the self, what's called the God archetype in Jungian psychology, it is the archetype of the weaving together of all the archetypes. It is a kind of awareness of the fact that these other littler archetypes have a relationship to each other and that relationship is indispensable. And that is like the core principle of most religions if you wipe away the surface of them. Most people's interest in serving God or praising God or being interested in God is frequently connected to that idea of wholeness. The idea of not prioritizing one way of being and attending to the fact that every way of being is related to every other way of being. And the study of that, the devotion to that principle, is called piety. All right. I guess it's good that we snuck that in at the end. It's like a whole new theory of the meaning of life. So what should a person do with their life? Well, it depends what phase of life they're in. You know, if they're in the phase of life where they need to sort of establish themselves or get some kind of credit in society, then they need to figure out what they're good at and seize on whatever archetypes they can in order to amplify what Jung calls the ego. Because you have to have a strong ego before you can become interested in the God archetype. Although other people would say, you should love God right away without ever trying to be a person first. And naturally, my attitude toward that is that that's not, that's not Jungian. Okay, and so what should we do with our life? Like, what should Jungian depth mystic Zach Tolan do with his life? Other than, make a Substack and continue the weekly podcast and make a video game when he has the focus and energy? What should we do with our life? I don't know. I think making a podcast is fine. And that's going to do it for episode 49. We're going to keep writing down awesome stuff so that we have a nice list of stuff to talk about for episode 50. We will see you then.